Thank you, Dana, so much for coming back to the Audacity to Care podcast. I've had the honor of having you on before as a candidate. We talked well before the primary election, so I'm so excited to have you here to have really a completely different conversation today.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. When we talked before the primary election, you were still trying to earn your spot, in that place of the primary. And now that you're here, what has this part of the campaign felt like compared to maybe what you expected?
That's a great question. To be honest, I don't know that I had any real clear expectations going into this campaign season. I mean, I think my expectations were toward myself, that I was going to sort of make the most of every opportunity that I had, try to get out to all the different corners of my district. And so that, I think, has been a success so far. I've really used the summer to get to the sort of the far-flung corners of my district and make connections, but also take a step back and regroup and organize and plan for the fall, because the fall is when things really ramp up. I mean, even right now we are, 60 odd days and some change to early voting, the start of early voting. And so there's so many things that we need to do. And of course, before early voting, there's also the deadline to register to vote. And so when you're working in an area that has a lot of newcomers, along with a couple of major universities, young folks that possibly haven't voted before, making sure to get your name out there and to get out, the importance of registering to vote before the deadline passes. There's just so many things that maybe weren't even entirely on my radar a few months ago that now are sort of clicking and falling into place and starting to make sense about what I need to do in the next, 90 some days until the general election.
Yeah, no pressure, right?
None at all. None at all.
Would you say, has there been anything that has surprised you since then?
Surprised by folks reaching out to me, and especially, of course, I had planned to work with the county Democratic parties, and I've been doing that, but also a lot of just groups of friends and people that are interested in making an impact in their own community that have reached out to me to make donations or get yard signs or schedule some kind of a block walk or a meet and greet event or bring me to speak at their organization's event has been really fantastic, because there's so many things, especially in such a big district. My district covers 10 counties. There's so many things going on, and there's always like this weird kind of element of FOMO. Like you feel like, oh shoot, I didn't know that event was happening. I didn't know that this event was happening, or I missed it, or I forgot to register for it on Mobilize, or whatever the case may be. But then while that's happening, there's also all these things that I would never have known about happening, but people are reaching out to me and saying, like, hey, we'd love for you to come speak at this event, or hey, we'd love for you to come speak at our house because we've got a group of people meeting that have a concern about XYZ, and we want to know more about the State Board of Education and their role with it. And so it's been a really kind of refreshing experience to have that happen. And the other thing that I'll say, which is kind of connected in a way, is that the past month or so, all of the Democratic candidates for the State Board of Education have really gotten together, and we've had some planning meetings. We've had some, collaboration and brainstorming sessions, and we are really, really dedicated to approaching this as a team, which I think is super helpful. You'll even see us on social media, name dropping one another and cross-posting things. And I think that is super important, because we're all in different districts and slightly different demographic wise. And we've got folks in the Valley, we've got folks in North Texas, and of course in the Houston area, but we're all trying to achieve the same goals. And so it's been really refreshing to kind of work as a team to make that happen.
Yeah, exactly. A collaborative effort with the same common goal. And I've seen that across the board. I've been able to assist with some things, and that has definitely been such a great thing for this office, because it's definitely an office that does not get enough attention. Doing that, those collaborative efforts has really amplified this office, and it's important for everyone to see that connection between all of you. Mm-hmm. Not just one or, separate 8 people. It's all of you working together to get where you want to be and for the same goal. I've loved seeing that on the voter end of it. So I'm so glad you guys have been doing that. And the other thing is you were speaking of is that, it takes a village, and the village has definitely showed up for you. Not just about the candidate getting out there and, putting themselves in all these places. The voters have to come together, and everyone in the community needs to come together and kind of meet you in the middle. And we need to be working together so that, you can get to all the places, because you can't just do it by yourself and thinking all the things. People are making the plans for you as well. And again, the village has showed up for you. So I'm really glad you're having those opportunities.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't even count the number of Signal and WhatsApp chats I've been added to in the past 60 days, but I'm grateful for it too. Like I sometimes I just have to have like a WhatsApp morning and go through and double check that I haven't missed anything, and, go through all of the old messages. But yeah, I've been added to so many different things, and I'm so sort of tuned into what's happening in a lot of different areas in the district. And so that's been really fun, just like fun
Yeah.
to folks.
Yeah. And that just goes to show how much people are paying attention.
Yeah,
And they're
absolutely.
noticing you, and they're wanting to bring you in. So it's a good thing, but it's also, it's like, it's very like overstimulating too sometimes, but
Yeah,
it's a good thing, right? It's a good problem to have.
absolutely.
Okay, so you have been on the campaign significantly longer than whenever we first chatted. You spent months talking to voters across your district of District 8. What are some things that you're hearing now? You mentioned things whenever we first interviewed, but again, being out there much longer now, what are some things that you are hearing from, parents, teachers, community members about public education, and maybe even people outside of education that don't really realize what's going on?
There's so many things going on. And to be honest, there's so many things that have happened even since I talked to you last. I mean, I think the last time that we had talked was just before the rollout of the school vouchers. And so I had mentioned that the State Board of Education didn't vote to approve the school vouchers. That's something that's done by the state legislature. However, they do have a role in distributing and executing the state vouchers. And there was this question of how it was going to be done, and was it going to be done fairly, and what percentage of students that were utilizing school vouchers were actually new to private schools versus those that were already enrolled in. So there's so many questions that came up, and we did get answers to a lot of those questions, right? We know, for example, that about 70% of students that are using school vouchers now were students that were previously in private schools. We have a lot more detailed information about that. It's still very much on the radar, but it's something now that is we even had a court case about whether or not there was religious influence into how the school vouchers were being distributed. And so we've been able to sort of see that through and see several different corrections. I'm firmly opposed to school vouchers, but I also believe that while we have them, they need to be distributed as equitably as possible. And so we've kind of seen how that's played out, and all the different struggles that they've had. Also, since I've talked to you last, we had both the April and the June meeting of the State Board of Education. The June meeting, they approved a huge variety of new curriculum changes for English language arts and for social studies, including a mandated reading list. I think a lot of folks don't know that Texas is one of the only states that has a mandated reading list. It's a little bit unusual in and of itself because although there's sort of classic standards that have been used at different grade levels throughout the country, the power in most states has been in the hands of the teachers or the local school districts to decide what they want their students reading each year. And, I think that's great because you can sort of customize to the students that you have in your class and the population of students you're teaching. And so that in and of itself is quite strange. And then the fact that there's mandated Bible verses on top of it has added this element of complexity that has become really problematic. And, we've seen it's not just the curriculum changes too. The Republicans on the State Board of Education are really not even being secretive about what they're trying to do in infusing more Christian ideology and very specifically Christian nationalist ideology into the curriculum. We can see that by some of the comments that they've made in the State Board of Education meetings, some of the content that they've posted on social media. And so this is incredibly concerning because, Texas public schools serve 5.5 million students of different backgrounds. And so, it's a violation of the Constitution, but it's also like bad practice in my mind. And not even to get into the fact of, a lot of the folks that are proposing these changes are not educators themselves. And so they don't understand the role that a professional who's educated in curriculum can have in choosing appropriate reading materials for their classroom. I have so many opinions. Like, there's just so many
I
things
get
that
it.
have changed.
Yeah, a
Yeah,
lot.
and that's just the reading list. That's not even getting into social studies curriculum.
Yeah, we could go down a rabbit hole for all of it.
Yeah. And so I think now the question has been, well, what are the next steps? Like, okay, let's say that we get more Democrats on the State Board of Education and we manage to flip the State Board of Education. What can we actually do about the changes that have already been made? And so those are some of the things that we're talking about and talking to voters about to make sure they understand, hey, we still have some power in this. We still have options, and we're out here working to secure those.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some big things for sure. You mentioned, non-educators bringing things up. What has been great about the 8 of you running for our State Board of Education is that all 8 of you have an education background.
Mhm.
And that does not happen nearly enough. And our current State Board of Education has zero to little education background that are making these decisions for students in schools. It just doesn't even make sense. So let's speak a little bit to, your background and you have 20 plus years in education. You've been in classrooms, higher education, administration. What do you understand about education because you've actually worked inside of it that you think someone without that experience might miss? Like what's happening now?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question because I sometimes have people ask, well, don't parents or concerned community members or working professionals in the area of STEM or engineering, like, don't they have sort of a valued place on the State Board of Education? And I have a complicated feeling about that because you're tempted to say yes, right? Parents have concerns, community members have concerns, professionals from different areas may have subject area expertise that's valuable. But the reality is, I think a lot of those concerns and the actions and the skill set of those folks are better served or are better accommodated on school boards, right? And so school boards are really meant to be at the local level, the community level, enacting sort of the day-to-day functions of the school system. The State Board of Education, if you look at its mission, is really tied to curriculum. Right. And as educators, and all of us, the 8 Democrats that are running, we have different backgrounds in education. Some of us have experience in administration or in classroom teaching, in ESL or in social studies or math, but we all have specific training in pedagogy, right? So pedagogy, curriculum, instruction, educational theory, developmental psychology, these are classes that you take if you become an educator, right? So again, some of us may have had it at the bachelor's level or the master's or the doctoral level, but we've all had some kind of training and education in that. And so I think that is critical to not just understand your local school or your own students, your own children, but to understand sort of how education works and how students learn and what curriculum we teach, but why we teach it at certain levels and how we teach it and how it's scaffolded with other things. Like, this is something that has an element of science to it, of how we learn and, how psychology is part of all of this. And so I really think that the folks on the State Board of Education should be educators. Maybe there's an exception out there. Maybe there's some person I haven't met yet that would be a fantastic candidate who doesn't have a background in education. But I really do think that the majority of folks on the State Board of Education should have a background in education. I'll give you an example. So early in my career, I started in elementary ESL. And early in my career, this is when I was working in Korea, the school that I was employed at basically had a contract with their National Board of Education in Korea to work with teachers to rewrite the ESL textbooks for grades 3 through 6. And so I was on the committee that was working with the grade 3 curriculum. And so grade 3 ESL in Korea is true beginner, right? Immersion beginner. And so we were able to write the textbook using exercises and activities and songs and all of these great things, knowing what had worked and what hadn't worked in our classroom. right? And so we were able to sort of work with subject area specialists and child psychologists and all of these different folks while also speaking to our own experience, right? And so, I would say, a very simple example of this is that certain types of activities work well with learning vocabulary, but not with learning grammar. Right. And that type of experience is really basic, but really foundational to developing curriculum, like knowing what works and what doesn't work and why it works and why it doesn't work. But also understanding, like, if we're creating an assessment for something, what is this assessment truly trying to measure, right? Is the STAR exam, for example, is it actually measuring what we say that it's measuring? Or is it measuring a content area through the lens also of like student anxiety and test taking problems? And, there's so many different things to consider that I just don't think that you are qualified to design if you don't have a background in education. I mean, you wouldn't want your nurse being a real estate broker, right?
I was going to say, it boggles my mind that we even have to have this conversation and, that we even have to justify and why it's not already just a requirement when you're running for the State Board of Education, because nobody questions the medical board. No one's questioning the doctors, and you just want a community member on the medical board, or like I'm sure the lawyers have their own boards. Like nobody questions those, but why are we questioning public education so much? And why wouldn't you want an educator in that position making choices about public school and students when they already have been there? They know it. They're still there because it's not a full-time paid job. They're still teaching. So they already know what is there. So it just boggles my mind that there's so much of this conversation within education. And even, people who are doing the school takeovers, no education background, people who they're just appointed. So again, just that.
I think it comes down to this, like, just very basic level lack of respect for teachers and for educators. Again, and I hate to use this example a little bit because maybe it's not fair to those that homeschool, but it kind of reminds me of homeschooling in some way. And don't get me wrong, I'm not inherently opposed to homeschooling. I think it has its purpose and its place. But if I had a high schooler, I wouldn't be homeschooling them calculus, because I am in no way qualified to teach calculus to anybody. But, I think that's an extreme example, but it's the same thing. If I, fell down and skinned my knee and needed stitches, I wouldn't try to do my own stitches. I would go to a professional who knows how to do stitches. Yeah, like it's crazy that there are certain things that we just accept that you have to be a professional to do, and other things that we somehow think anybody could do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it boggles my mind because I am a former educator, so I get it. But I also can see the perspective of people who have not been in, a school building as an educator, why they would, make these assumptions. But again, it starts from the top, and the disrespect of public education from the top. And, and that disrespect trickles down all the way out into the community.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah. So let's talk about the State Board of Education specifically. Sure. For someone watching who still doesn't really know much about the State Board of Education, that's probably still lots of people out there. Give me one decision that the State Board of Education makes where you would say, this is why you should care who sits on this seat.
Let me give an example that's not specifically connected to curriculum, because I think that curriculum is what we hear a lot about. And so, you can kind of understand how that would be important to what your kid is learning in school. But another thing that I think is particularly important is that the State Board of Education sets the standards for teacher certification in the state of Texas, and also alternative teacher certification. And so we've seen recently that there has been sort of a boon in alternative teacher certification programs. And let me first say that I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, right? I've met all kinds of folks that went through alternative teacher certification programs that have ended up being fantastic teachers. And I think that serves a purpose in our system, and particularly can be great too for, I'll use as an example, some of our workforce instructors, right? If you are a high school welding teacher, there's a good chance that you didn't get a bachelor's degree in education. You probably got an associate's degree in welding and then moved on from there. And so that's a perfect example of someone that could be a great candidate for alternative teacher certification because they have the work experience that's necessary to teach a career or technical skill like that. But now they need to go back and learn the pedagogy and the sort of essentials of teaching 101. So I don't think that that's inherently a bad thing. But we do have more and more and more people doing alternative teacher certification, which also allows them in many instances to start teaching with no training. So what happens in a lot of these programs is that you are hired in a position, you start teaching immediately, and then you're doing evening classes or online asynchronous classes over the course of a year or 2 years to then earn your certification at the end. And we saw last year, there was a statistic that came out for the last school year that more than 50% of newly hired teachers in the state of Texas did not have a complete certification. So they were either coming in completely uncertified or somewhere in the middle of that alternative certification process, which I think is just problematic on so many levels. And again, sort of speaks to the disrespect of the profession, right? This idea that, oh, we just need somebody to babysit these 30,
we need more body.
yeah, 30 second graders so they don't hurt themselves. And, if over the course of the next year you can learn a couple things about teaching, that'd be great. And I think you, as a parent, as a community member, you want certified teachers in our schools. And so, again, I'm not saying that there's not a place for this, but it should be the exception and not the rule.
Yeah. And that brings it back to what we were speaking before. Why wouldn't you want a certified doctor? Why wouldn't you want a certified mechanic for your car?
Exactly.
The simplest of things. Why, it's just people assuming anyone can do the job. No, you really can't. It takes a certain person and it takes stepping into it really to fully recognize the responsibility of it. But it isn't for everyone and not everyone can do it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're
Well,
right.
and to be honest, too, there have been a lot of studies that show that folks that go the alternative teacher certification route oftentimes don't last as long in the profession because maybe this wasn't their plan A, it was their plan B or their plan C. And sometimes you don't know until you get in the classroom whether or not this is for you. And I'll tell you, I am open about the fact that I started in elementary. Elementary wasn't for me.
No, it wasn't.
I discovered quickly that I like working with older students. But sometimes you just don't know until you're in the classroom doing it and having that sort of lived experience.
Right. And unfortunately, where we are now, we need those alternative certification teachers because so many certified teachers are either leaving the classroom, they just don't want to go. They don't want to come back. They're not there. So we're having to take so many more of those because we're out of good options.
Yeah. And I work at a community college. And so I meet so many students now that are hesitant to go into education because the starting salary, the base starting salary in the state of Texas is just under $34,000 a year. That's not even livable in Texas, closer to $45,000.
Yeah.
And so, why, as a young person, why would you want to go into that field, especially given the level of disrespect?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and even if it starts in the 60s, even that's not livable at this point.
Yeah, no.
That's not. Maybe if you're a single, young person, maybe. Yeah, it's not livable at all. And teachers having to get multiple jobs just to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have a lot of things that we need to work on. But again, I think a lot of the conversation is around curriculum, which again is a big part of what the State Board of Education does. But I think, highlighting some of these other responsibilities as well can put it in perspective for how much it sort of touches you directly as a parent or as a community member.
Yeah. Absolutely. So since we talked last time, is there anything that you said when we did talk before the primary that you would answer differently today? And not because your values have changed in any way, but because now you've been campaigning and talking to voters a lot more. What has that taught you?
I don't know that anything that I have said has changed much, although...
Any perspective, because you've talked to so many more people, been in it a little bit more. Has anything changed?
Yeah. So one thing that I'll say is that, and I knew this before, but I think that talking to people has helped sort of elevate it, which is that all of these issues are interconnected. Right. And so I do a lot of sort of combo events or collaborative events with folks running for state legislature or Congress, and they're very focused on affordable healthcare, for example. Well, affordable healthcare is also a primary concern if you're a teacher making $34,000 a year, right?
Mhm.
It's also a primary concern if you're thinking about a child with special medical needs accessing the educational services that they need. We're hearing a lot now about data centers, right? Data center this, data center that. I actually had someone at an event a couple weeks ago say, am I losing my mind, or did data centers not exist until about 3 months ago? And suddenly now we're hearing everything of them. And
Can't
I'm like,
not.
I don't know that it was 3 months exactly, but I hear what you're saying. Like, even last year, this time, I feel like data centers were not on our radar in any way to the extent that they are now. But, data centers are tied to AI, and AI like desperately have to address this from an educational perspective because it's going to change everything about how we interact with AI and what we're using it for and what we are outsourcing and what needs to retain a human connection. And so I think the interconnectedness of these issues is something that I'm thinking a lot about now. And a part of that has been doing these collaborative events with folks running for different kinds of offices. And I hear them saying, like, well, we got to fix this, we got to fix this. And it starts with public education. I'm like, you're
It
right. It
does.
starts with public education. And,
I think
I
it's
say that
part
like
of that,
broadly speaking. Yeah. I mean, in all kinds of different ways. And so I think that that is something that's very much on my radar. And, you know, I think in the past, and this is just me being an observer of the political process, we've focused so much on folks who were, you're an economy voter, or you are a reproductive rights voter, or this is the one thing that you care about. And I just don't think that people vote like that anymore. I don't know that they ever did, but now they really don't because
right,
everything is
connected.
so interconnected. They have to think about the whole picture.
Yeah. And that's important to put out there. I'm glad you're speaking on that, because I'm sure there's plenty of people who still don't recognize that, but it is, it's just like saying, I'm not political. You're literally doing everything that's political. It's
Yeah.
politics, as much as you don't want it to, it's icky. I get it, but it's literally touching everything. You are
Yeah.
touching everything that is political, and same with education. It's part of everything, and it all is very
Well,
interconnected.
and I always tell my students, not voting is a political choice. So you're political whether you want to be or not.
Yeah, and it's like that light bulb hasn't come on, like that connection. But yeah, once you realize it, you can't unsee it. So you are on the Democratic slate for the State Board of Education, but in becoming a State Board of Education member, you are on the board for all students, no
Mhm.
matter what party. So, going out there, and you're not just talking to Democratic voters, maybe you've been talking to Republicans, maybe independents. What would you say to those Republican and independent voters who also care deeply about what's going on in public education, but don't necessarily vote for a Democrat?
Yeah. So, there's a lot of different ways to talk to voters from both sides of the aisle. But one thing that I like to focus on is Texas is not performing well in education, right? And this is something, and we could go into an argument or a discussion about how State Board of Education shouldn't be a partisan office anyway, right? We should just simply be focused on improving our educational standards. I actually fully agree with that. I don't think that this should be a partisan office, but a lot of what's happening right now with the State Board of Education could be sort of broadly characterized as culture wars, right? When we look at the curriculum and the changes that are trying to be made, we have spent so much time
Mhm.
talking about Bible readings that I want to know why Texas is 44th in the country for eighth grade English language arts, right?
Yes.
Can we talk less about the Bible readings and more about our performance?
Right. How is the
And
Bible reading going to get us higher?
exactly. Well,
Um,
and that's the thing. There's no plan. And so I think one thing that everyone can agree on is like, we need students graduating from our public schools to be ready for whatever is next in life for them, whether that's college, career, military. We need to know that they are adequately prepared. And, we've got two, apart from the culture wars, we've got two massive things that have impacted our student college and career readiness in the past 6 years. COVID, which we're still bouncing back from, and now AI. Right? And so understanding how those two things have impacted our students' ability to learn and retain information and, even things like reading comprehension and processing and how they're doing that, like that's something that everybody cares about. That's something that everybody should care about. And a great example of this is that there was a statistic that came out recently, and I apologize, I don't have the exact number, so I'm not going to quote it, but that fewer and fewer students are reading full-length books, right? They're reading excerpts, they're reading sort of the TikTok version of the book, right? And the interesting thing is, like, this has always been a problem. We've always had Cliff Notes. We've always had ways
This
to
isn't
sort of
new.
cheat the system a little bit or get around it. But the fact that we have fewer and fewer students that are able to sit down and read the full-length book shows a couple of different things, right? It shows that we're having issues with attention span. And it also shows that the students don't understand the value of reading the entire arc of the story and how that might be related to some of the questions that they're being asked about it. And so that's kind of a very fundamental comprehension failure as well. And again, these are problems that we don't even really know the full trajectory of the problem yet, because these students that are not reading full books, or they're not able to keep their attention span for more than 5 minutes or 10 minutes, like what sorts of issues could result from that later on in their life or in their career, right? And we see it happening already, because we see a lot of these students getting to college and being told in college, hey, this is the slate of books we're reading this semester. You've got a 10-page paper, and then you've got an oral defense, whatever the case may be. And the students are just wholly unprepared for this.
Right. Right.
Right. And so
Right.
they're either thinking like, I'm going to have to rely on AI, right? Hey, Chat GPT, please summarize this book for me. Or they're going to find other ways to sort of work around the system and not learn what they need to learn. And so again, this is something that we're only just now starting to see the impact of, but we don't know how it might affect our students. And it's something that we should all be concerned about. Doesn't matter if you vote Republican or Democrat. My message to a lot of voters is that since my opponent has been in office, our scores have not improved. The majority of our test scores and our rankings nationwide have not improved. And so vote across the aisle. Right? Like there is no shame in voting for a Democrat or voting for someone that might ordinarily differ from your political views. The question at stake is the success of our kids.
Yeah. Who's going to actually help the education system and help us improve, right? People over party.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my platform is called The Audacity to Care. And part of what I'm constantly telling people is that, voting is extremely important, and not just paying attention to, getting to election day, but what happens beyond that as well. If you are elected, what should voters be paying attention to from the State Board of Education after November? We want to give them a reason to invest and stay invested beyond just getting them into the spot. After that, what are we hoping to do?
So I want to say care about everything, but I know that's a tough pitch. So let me explain just a little bit about how State Board of Education works. We're on a rotating cycle for the curriculum that's evaluated each year. So this year was English language arts and social studies. Next year is science and math, right? I think it goes without saying how important science and math are. Not to say that English language arts and social studies aren't important. They are incredibly important as well. But if I can go again to talking about like how interconnected a lot of these issues are, science and math is fundamentally connected to our immigration system as well, in a way that a lot of people don't realize. So if you were to go to the hospital right now, there's a very good chance that your nurse might be from the Philippines, that your doctor might be from Pakistan, your surgeon might be from Peru. And we want folks to come and work in our healthcare system because we do not have enough students graduating with these degrees in the US.
Right.
Why is that? Well, a lot of times it's because our students are not up to par in math and science, or they get turned off from math and science at an early age, right? We know that there's a really complicated sort of gender dynamic with this as well. Personally talk to my students about the fact that when I was in 8th grade, I had a teacher that basically told me I wasn't good at math and I should look at other things. And that stuck with me all throughout high
Yeah.
school. And, interestingly enough, I married an engineer, but sometimes we talk about the fact that, I don't know, like maybe I would have gone into engineering if I didn't have that one experience with that one teacher, right? And so, the only way that we can overcome some of these problems is to take a hard look at math and science, see how we're teaching it, see where our students are failing or where they are getting disconnected, right? Math is one of those areas that so many students, I like to compare math to the dentist, right? Like the dentist is not bad until you've had a bad experience.
Yeah, neither of those are my favorite either, by the way.
And once you've had a bad experience, then you start to dread the dentist,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so, how do we turn math into something that students view as an essential skill and something that can empower them to open more doors
Right.
instead of making them feel like they are small or they don't understand or they're not worthy, they're not capable. And so that's on the agenda for next year. And that's huge.
Yeah. The kids always ask, how am I going to use this in the future? I
Oh,
mean, they
yeah.
really want to know the answer to that. And if you can answer that for them and get them to see the importance of that, then that's a flip of the script there that they might not necessarily agree with it because they don't know yet, but they'll be like, okay, I guess I
And
just have to learn
even
that.
getting students to be familiar with math or the scientific process as like a fundamental understanding of, I teach government, but I use this example all the time in my classes of, let's say you take a prescription medication. How did that prescription medication come to be approved? What was
Mhm.
the scientific process that the researchers and the companies, whatever, that they undertook to get to the point where now your doctor can prescribe it to you and you can take it. It doesn't matter if you go into healthcare or if you become a pharmacist. That's something you should know, right? You should have a basic understanding of how, medicines are approved and the scientific process that we go through to get to that stage. And then you can start to apply that scientific process to other things, right? And once you are familiar with this and you're learning about this at middle school or high school, it starts to make you curious about how this is applied in other disciplines. And
Yeah.
so that
And
should be,
we've definitely
yeah.
lost that curiosity and wanting to be a problem solver and figure things out.
Exactly. And it makes you so much more eager to ask questions when you get older too, right? Like, I'll give a great example. The COVID vaccine came out and, there's a big group of people that were really hesitant and another group of people that are like, get the vaccine. And there was also a middle ground of people like, well, I just want to ask my doctor a few questions. And I'm like, that's great. You should ask your doctor questions.
Yeah.
Right. It would be strange if you didn't have questions. And so, thinking like fostering that inquisitive curiosity and making math and science not just something like, we got to get to a certain level. We got to get to a certain test score. We've got to, kind of cutthroat. You get it or you don't get it. You need to go to tutoring. But this idea that math and science are exploratory and that they should drive our curiosity to learn more and understand more about how the world works. Like it's funny because I don't consider myself a math and science expert or a STEM expert in any way, but it's one of my favorite things to talk about because I think I've like developed a love for it as an adult that I
Mm.
didn't learn as a child.
Right.
And so I'm really excited next year to take on math and science and not only to improve our scores and improve what our students are learning about and achieving, but also how they're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I love to hear you speak on that. You sound very passionate for someone who doesn't teach math and science, but I would want you to be my math and science teacher just based
Yeah.
on your
I'm
enthusiasm.
telling you, being married to an engineer like changes everything. Because I told you she's a marine engineer, and I hear so much about like ship stability and physics and all the things.
Like, I really wish I would have taken an interest in
Yeah,
math when I was younger now. But hey, you get to experience it as an adult and you certainly have a more of appreciation. There's a lot of things that I didn't appreciate as a kid that, like history. I thought history was so boring as a kid. Now as an adult, it's like fascinating, so just change your perspective as you get older, obviously.
Absolutely.
So we'll close with this question. So we are less than, I forget the countdown. We're less than 9 days to actual election day, even less than that, with early voting beginning October 19th. What do you want someone who is watching this interview to remember about you when they see your name on the ballot?
I want you to remember.
It's a loaded question.
It is kind of a loaded question. I love loaded questions, though. I want you to remember that we really need to stock the State Board of Education with educators. And I'm one. So if you see me on your ballot, please vote for me. Please vote blue down the ballot. It really is something for us to enact change. We're going to have to flip the governor seat. We're going to have to flip some major races, but every vote counts. So please, whether you live in my district or not, think about how important it is to vote for an educator for the State Board of Education. And then the other thing that I'll say about me too is maybe I haven't had enough opportunity to show this off in the campaign yet. Maybe it's coming, but I am a fighter. I will not take no for an answer. I am going to be, hopefully, knock on wood, delivering my first public comment to State Board of Education on August 31st at their next meeting. I have not been able to attend the previous two because I've had work commitments, but I am really well-spoken when I want to be, and I can also be quite, I don't know if the word is passionate or just, I know what I want and I'm determined to work hard to get it. And so the culture wars, the nonsense that's been going on in the State Board of Education, if you've watched any of the meeting recordings, I did not come to play that game. And so I'm here to take this seriously. And I think that there are some folks that are absolutely not taking it seriously. And so I'm really excited to pay them a visit at the end of August.
Awesome. I love to hear it. I love to hear it. Let's see more of that. Thank you so much for being here.
Of
I am
course.
fortunate to have you as my candidate for District 8. So knowing you and interviewing you, I see your passion. I see everything. And I'm so excited to vote for you. And I'm so thankful to be able to amplify your campaign and your voice and everything that you're trying to do, as well as the other State Board of Education candidates. And I'm just excited to get this going.
Thank you so
a great
much.
year.
I always love talking to you, and I love the work that you do. So thank you for having me on again.
Thank you.